Hi, it's Jill Foster with Shimmerz Paints, and today I'll be creating a card using the Creamies, Blings, and Shimmers, and I'll be using these on creative dies from Penny Black to assemble this scene with a daisy and a mason jar. And the Shimmerz products that I'll be working with today are the Shimmerz Paints, which have a beautiful glitter and shimmer to them. I'll be using the Blings, which is like the Shimmerz paint, but the sparkle is much more intense. It's really pretty. And I'm also using the Creamies, which are a watercolor with a touch of shimmer, and they have a satin finish. These are the Penny Black creative dies and stamps that I'll be using, and all of the colors of paints and stamp names and numbers and all supplies will be listed at the end of the video. So to begin, I am going to be making my background, and I'm using some of the Shimmerz paints as well as the Creamies. And the Shimmers you just stir up, and I use the back of my paintbrush to stir those up. And the Creamies are activated with water. So I just put about 3 or 4 squirts into the jar and let it sit for about a minute or so, and then I'm ready to go. So to start off, I'm using this mason jar die cut from Penny Black. I wet it down with water, and this was cut from Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. My background and all my die cuts were done with this paper. And I'm applying the Shimmers. This is the color of ultramarine, mostly on the left side. And because that die cut is wet, the color naturally bleeds over to the right. And this is the daisy die cut. And I'm going to start by putting a light layer of water all over that. And then I'll use the golden wheat Shimmers. And I'll just drop that in and let the water naturally bleed it down into the petals. And I also added a touch of the pumpkin Shimmers on top. Now, because I wanted to have some extra dimension when I put my card together, I did paint 2 of the daisies, and I used the same technique. And I apologize, I'm just a little bit off camera there. So again, the golden wheat, and then a touch of the pumpkin Shimmers. And I'm just stirring up that paint. And I also added, and that was the Creamies paint, and I added a touch of that Strawberry Fields on there too. To paint the stem and the leaves, I'm using the Luck of the Irish Creamies. And like I said before, these have just a touch of shimmer, and they have kind of a satin creamy finish when they're done, or when they're dry. Now for my background, I'm going to start by painting the entire piece of watercolor paper with just water. This will help the colors bleed and blend together. I also painted the back, and this helps it lie flat on my work surface. And I'm going to begin by adding the Firm Foundation Creamies. And I'm just pouncing this on and getting that color onto the background, and I'll let it blend and bleed on its own. This is the Just Peachy Creamies. And then the Strawberry Fields. And you can see how those colors really move and blend together well. And I'm using all warm colors to begin with. And down there at the bottom, I'm adding some of the pumpkin Shimmers. And again, sorry, I just got that just off camera a little bit. Here's a little bit of the golden wheat Shimmers. So you can mix and match with the Shimmers and the Creamies paints, and you'll get a variety of textures on the background. Now I decided to go bold. Once that was dry, and I dried it with my heat gun, I'm going in with that ultramarine right on top. And there you can just get a peek at some of the shimmer that's happening. And then I add water and even more, and I lift up the paper and let the colors drip and move wherever I've added the water. And I can use a baby wipe just to dab off any excess. I'll go back in with some of those original colors of the Creamies and let those blend into the ultramarine. And then water will blend that all together. Then I'll go ahead and dry that with my heat gun. And I'm going to add a touch of stamping down here at the bottom. Wasn't sure if I was going to add more color on top, so I'm using Stays On ink. That way if I do decide to add more paint and color, then that won't bleed at all. And you can see there the background that I'm working on, all of the awesome shimmer and texture that got once it was dry. So I'm ready to put everything together. So I'm putting down the mason jar and I'm putting that down with dimensional adhesive, so some foam squares on the back. Then I'll use some liquid glue on the die cuts. And I also painted some additional die cuts with the coffee Shimmerz paint, those extra little branches in the background. So I'll just be putting all of these pieces together. Get some extra dimension by layering 2 of the flowers. We'll add these branches in. Because the mason jar is propped up, I can just stick them right behind using liquid adhesive. And then the leaves I separated from the stem so I could add them exactly where I wanted them to go. Now I want to paint the ground just underneath that jar. So because it's propped up, I can easily get my brush underneath. And I'm using the Thunderstorm Creamy. So I'd already added my water and let it sit, and then I stirred it up, and I'm just adding that down below. That just kind of grounds that bouquet in the mason jar, so it doesn't look like it's just floating on the front. Now I'm going to add the blings. And again, these are very much like the Shimmerz paint, only the sparkle is much more intense. And I'm just stirring them up. And the color I'm using is Pixie Dust. I'm stirring it up with the back of my paintbrush. And I'm going to add this on top of the flower and also on those extra little branches down below. And I'll just zoom in here so you can get a good look at that. I wanted a very thick layer because I wanted it to look really chunky and add even more texture on the flower so that it matches the texture of the background that we did. And there you can see I'm just adding that on those branches too. This added so much shine to the card, but what I especially loved about it was the texture that it added. In a second here, I'll give you a look at all of that texture and the shimmer that you get from the blings. I like that it dried fairly translucent so that the coloring and the painting that I did beneath it still shows. And so now that that's dry, or starting to dry, here's just a look at the shimmer. And to finish everything off, I just mounted this to my note card and added a twine bow and a self-adhesive pearl. And just another peek here at all those great textures achieved with these paints. And there's the final card. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you place an order with Shimmers, be sure to mention my name, Jill Foster, in the notes to merchant section so you can get some free paint. And also lets us know that you enjoyed today's video and want to see more. And at the end of this video is the complete list of all the supplies used for the entire card.